I was a high-ranking officer at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm that I'd helped grow from a struggling startup into a multi-million-dollar operation. But last Tuesday morning, my entire career came crashing down in the most humiliating way possible. I walked into the office just like any other day, holding my usual black coffee and checking my phone for emails. Sarah, the receptionist, gave me a strange look, the kind of uncomfortable glance that makes your stomach churn without a clear reason. I should have paid attention to that warning sign, but I was too focused on the quarterly reports I needed to review. The bomb dropped at exactly 9:47 a.m. I recall the precise time because I was looking at my computer screen when my assistant knocked on my door. "Mr. Henderson wants to see you in his office immediately," she said, avoiding eye contact. The word "immediately" sent shivers down my spine. James Henderson, the company's founder, was sitting behind his mahogany desk with an expression of cold indifference that I'd never seen before. Next to him was Patricia Walsh, the new HR director who'd been hired just 3 months prior. She was a woman who had been nothing but trouble since day one. She had a smug little smile that made my blood pressure spike. "Robert," Henderson began, his voice completely devoid of warmth, "we've made a difficult decision. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit me like a freight train. 25 years. 25 years of 12-hour days, weekend work, missed family dinners, and sleepless nights worrying about cash flow and profit margins. I'd been there when Henderson was eating ramen noodles in a cramped office above a pizza shop. I'd been the one who secured the loan that saved the company during the 2008 recession. I'd been the architect of every major financial strategy that had made Henderson a millionaire. "What? What do you mean, eliminated?" I stammered, my hand starting to shake. Patricia leaned forward with her insufferable smirk. "The company is restructuring. We're implementing new cost-cutting measures, and frankly, your salary has become excessive for the current market conditions." Excessive. The word burned in my throat. I was making $180,000 a year. Decent money, for sure, but hardly excessive for someone who'd increased company revenue by 400% over 2 decades. I knew the real reason, though. 3 months ago, I questioned some of Patricia's innovative HR policies and her ridiculous spending on consultants and team-building retreats. I'd raised concerns about her lack of experience and the way she was hemorrhaging money on unnecessary programs. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance," Henderson added, not even looking me in the eye. "Security will escort you to clean out your desk." 2 weeks. After 25 years of loyalty, dedication, and literally saving the company multiple times, they were giving me 2 weeks severance and a security escort like I was some kind of criminal. The walk to my office felt like a death march. 2 security guards flanked me as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. Family photos, my coffee mug that read, "World's Best Dad," the small plant my wife had given me for our anniversary. Colleagues I'd worked with for years couldn't even look at me. Some whispered among themselves. Others suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. But here's what Henderson and his new HR darling didn't know. What they were too arrogant and short-sighted to realize. I wasn't just the CFO. I was the keeper of every financial secret, every client relationship, and every operational detail that made the company function. More importantly, I'd been quietly documenting some very interesting discrepancies in the books over the past few months. You see, Patricia's expensive consultants and retreats weren't the only questionable expenses I'd noticed. There were some very creative accounting practices happening, ones that I'd been investigating discreetly. Henderson had been funneling money through shell companies, inflating expenses, and hiding assets in ways that would make the IRS very, very interested. As I drove home that afternoon, My phone started buzzing with messages from colleagues expressing their shock and sympathy. But one call stood out. It was from Marcus Thompson, our biggest client and a personal friend of mine for over 15 years. "Robert, I just heard what happened. This is insane," he said. "You know, Henderson called me this morning trying to reassure me about the transition, but I told him flat out, you leave, I leave. My contract is with you, not that company." That's when it hit me. Marcus wasn't the only client who felt that way. Over the years, I'd built personal relationships with 70% of Henderson and Associates' client base. These weren't just business relationships. These were friendships built on trust, competence, and years of delivering results. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Marcus back. "Remember that offer you made me 2 years ago about starting our own firm?" I asked. "Are you serious, Robert? Because I've been waiting for this call for years." Within 48 hours, Marcus and I had the framework for Thompson Mitchell Financial Consulting. Within a week, we had our first office space leased and business cards printed. But the real fireworks were just beginning. The beginning of the end. The first domino fell on a Thursday. Patricia called me, and for the first time since I'd known her, the smugness was gone from her voice. "Robert, we need to talk. Henderson wants to offer you a consulting position." I almost laughed out loud. "A consulting position after you eliminated my job because my salary was too excessive?" "Look, we're having some challenges with client retention," she said. "Maybe we acted hastily." Challenges. That was a nice way of putting it. What she couldn't say, was that in the 10 days since they'd fired me, 4 major clients had terminated their contracts. Marcus had been the first, followed by Davidson Industries, Clearwater Corp., and McKinsey Holdings. Together, these 4 clients represented nearly $2.8 million in annual revenue. But I wasn't done. Remember those financial irregularities I'd been investigating? Well, I'd kept meticulous records, and I'd been consulting with a lawyer friend of mine who specialized in corporate fraud. It turns out that when you're the CFO of a company engaging in questionable practices, you have a legal obligation to report certain activities to regulatory authorities, especially when you're no longer employed by that company. The phone call I made to the IRS was surprisingly pleasant. Agent Rebecca Foster was very interested in the documentation I compiled. She was especially intrigued by the pattern of inflated consulting fees, mysterious overseas transactions, and the creative depreciation schedules that Henderson had been using to dodge taxes. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "we'll need you to come in for a formal interview next week. This appears to be a significant case of tax evasion and potentially fraud." By the end of month 2, Henderson and Associates was in complete freefall. 8 more clients had jumped ship, taking their business either to my new firm or to competitors. The company's revenue had dropped by over 60%, and the rumors about an IRS investigation were spreading through their industry network like wildfire. Patricia, meanwhile, was desperately trying to manage a crisis that was spiraling completely out of control. Her expensive consultants were nowhere to be found when real problems hit. Her team-building retreats couldn't fix the fundamental issue. The person who actually knew how to run the financial side of the business was gone, and he'd taken the client's trust with him. The 3rd month brought the moment I'd been waiting for. Henderson called me directly, his voice shaking with what I could only describe as panic. "Robert, we need to talk in person, please." I met him at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. The man who had fired me with such cold indifference looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 months. His hands were trembling as he stirred his coffee, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting stress. "I made a mistake," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Patricia convinced me that we could cut costs and bring in a fresh perspective. But what, James? I asked, genuinely curious to hear how he explained away 25 years of loyalty flushed down the drain. The company is hemorrhaging money. We've lost over 70% of our client base. The IRS is conducting a full audit. Our reputation in the industry is destroyed. And Patricia, he paused, rubbing his temples. Patricia quit last week. Took a job in another state. Of course she did. Rats always flee a sinking ship. I'm offering you a full partnership, he continued desperately. 50% ownership, complete control of finances, double your old salary. Please, Robert, you're the only one who can save the company. I took a long sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. This was the same man who'd had me escorted out by security. The same man who'd called my salary excessive. The same man who'd thrown away 25 years of partnership for the sake of cost-cutting and some HR consultant's ego trip. James, I said, setting down my cup, I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. His face went completely white. What do you mean, decline? Robert, the company will collapse without you. You're probably right, I agreed. But that's not my problem anymore. You see, Thompson Mitchell Financial Consulting is doing quite well. We've grown to 15 employees in just 3 months, and our client satisfaction ratings are the highest in the industry. We're projected to hit $3.2 million in revenue this year. The irony was delicious. My new company was thriving with many of Henderson's former clients, while Henderson and Associates was circling the drain. The man who'd thought he could replace my decades of experience and client relationships with cost-cutting and corporate buzzwords was learning a very expensive lesson about the value of loyalty and institutional knowledge. But we built this company together, he pleaded. 25 years, Robert. Doesn't that mean anything? I stood up to leave, putting on my coat with deliberate slowness. You're absolutely right, James. 25 years should mean something. You taught me that lesson very clearly when you had security escort me out like a common criminal. The final chapter. The final nail in the coffin came 6 months later. The IRS investigation concluded with Henderson personally owing over $800,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. The company was forced to sell its assets to cover the debt, and Henderson had to declare personal bankruptcy. The business that had once been worth millions was liquidated for pennies on the dollar. Henderson called me one last time about a year after he'd fired me. This time there was no offer, no desperate plea for salvation. Just a broken man trying to make sense of how his world had collapsed so completely. I should have never let Patricia talk me into letting you go, he said. I should have trusted a man who'd been loyal to me for 25 years instead of some consultant who barely knew the business. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. Today, Thompson Mitchell Financial Consulting employs 35 people and services clients across 3 states. We're known for our integrity, client loyalty, and the kind of old-fashioned business values that seem to be disappearing in today's corporate world. Last month, we were featured in Financial Business Weekly as one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. As for Henderson, last I heard, he was working as a junior accountant for a small firm across town, making about $45,000 a year. Patricia disappeared entirely after her resignation. Word through the industry grapevine is that her next employer discovered some irregularities in her previous work history and let her go during the probationary period. The lesson here isn't about revenge. It's about understanding the true value of experience, loyalty, and relationships in business. Henderson thought he could cut costs by eliminating his highest-paid employee without considering what that employee actually brought to the table. He chose to trust a newcomer with fancy credentials over someone who had literally built the company alongside him. But perhaps The most satisfying part of this entire ordeal wasn't watching Henderson's company collapse or seeing Patricia's schemes backfire. It was proving to myself that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's short-sighted decision. It was discovering that the relationships I'd built, the reputation I'd earned, and the expertise I developed over 25 years couldn't be eliminated with a pink slip and a security escort. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't plotting or scheming. It's simply being so good at what you do that removing you from the equation causes everything to fall apart. It's building something better than what you left behind and proving that their loss truly was your gain. Henderson learned the hard way that when you throw away loyalty, experience, and institutional knowledge for the sake of short-term cost savings, you might just be signing your own corporate death warrant. And frankly, after 25 years of dedication and respect, watching that lesson play out was worth every sleepless night and moment of uncertainty I'd endured. The moral of the story? Never underestimate the person who's been quietly holding everything together. Because when they're gone, you might discover that they weren't just an expense to be cut. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built.